Research shows that 82% of workers claim that their leaders, their managers, are, quote, fundamentally uninspiring. Think about those words, fundamentally uninspiring. That doesn't mean that on the surface level they're not charismatic. It doesn't mean that these individuals don't know how to tell stories, or maybe that they've made a mistake. What it means fundamentally, in their DNA, they are not somebody that others want to follow. Now, just in case you think that may just be from the worker's perspective, only 11% of organizations claim that they have a strong or very strong leadership bench. Organizations, businesses, nonprofits, formal organizations whose job it is to pull people together towards an objective. Only 1 out of every 10 claims to have a strong leadership bench. And just in case you think that this is only the business world, try this one on for size. Forget leadership, forget inspiration. 55% of Americans don't even trust their political leaders. Without trust, there is no leadership. I don't know about you, but to me, this data says that we have a fundamental leadership crisis going on in the world today. The data says it, the facts say it, but I'm willing to bet that your life experience tells you the same thing. Just look around you. We live in a society where we're continually fighting with one another. We live in a world where we let the smallest differences get in the way, where we can't progress because people are always on different sides. It's not to say that there aren't objective truths that we can disagree with, but fundamentally, our world is lacking leaders, and we experience it on a day in and day out basis. And if you are like me, you can't help but ask the question, why? Well, let's go back to the research. What does it say? A survey of different leadership reports and research studies shows that only about 10% of human beings are naturally inclined to lead. That's 1 out of every 10. Now, before you lose hope, try this one on. There's another 20% of the population that has the raw skills, has the wrong talents to be good leaders. But on a day in and day out basis, go untapped because they're not invested in. Because we haven't defined what leadership is. We haven't defined how to do it. I think a lot of that is because of this question right here. Over the past century, there has been tons of research done on the science of management. Make no mistake, great leaders are absolutely good managers. And great managers tend to be really good leaders. But in this world, we have over-indexed on management. The research, the science is all about how do we harness the power of the human spirit to reach our selfish objectives versus leadership, which is all about unlocking human potential. Leadership is something that in this world we say, I know it when I see it. Take Nelson Mandela, for example. I think most people in the world will step back, not knowing much about him, and say, what an unbelievable leader. It takes a great leader to go from prison to president. It takes a great leader to turn the tide of racism in South Africa, to impact not just a country, but a continent, and dare I say, the entire world. But have you ever stopped and asked the question, why? Is it just because he was courageous? Is it just because it happened? You're sitting here tonight because something inside of you attracted you to a talk on leadership. Something inside of you called you to participate in the Leadership Institute. If you want to be a leader, you can be. But you better think about what that means. You better think about how to do it. And you better be intentional, because the world needs you to do it. Leadership is an art. It's a craft. Leadership is all about tapping into the human spirit. It's about speaking to hearts. It's about unlocking human potential. The craft of leadership is about taking certain disciplines, certain skills, and applying them to real life circumstances to help others reach objectives that they could never imagine. If you're called to be a leader, if leadership is your vocation, that's what you're called to do, is to tap into the human spirit and to help others become the best version of themselves. Let's take a look at what that might look like. And dare I say that if you want to be a leader, if you want to help fill this void, you can do it by following 5 different values. If you live these values, I can assure you that others will want to follow. The first one is to embrace humility. And I want to tell you a story. I graduated from the Franciscan University of Steubenville in 1999. It was December in that year, and we were in the middle of the .com era. I studied communications. I thought I was going to move into radio and television production. I quickly got out of school and realized it was really hard to make a living in that field. And so I ended up going and working for an ad agency. And at this ad agency, my very first client was a software company. And I began to consult and travel to the Silicon Valley every single week. And through that experience, I met a CTO. The CTO's name was John Fowler. Now, John, very quickly, seeing this new grad that knew nothing about software or software companies, took me under his wing. He also realized that not only did I need a mentor, I needed a mentor not just in my work, but in my faith. And he actually invited me to pray every single morning with a friend of his in the office. And we began to build a relationship. And ultimately, 3 months in, he offered me a new job, and I went and worked for him. 2 years later, 2 years into my career, John and I were working together at a consulting company. And John, still to this day, the smartest technologist I've ever met, and one of the best human beings I've ever met, helped the business that I was working for to land a really big contract with Frito-Lay. It was a game changer for the business. As we were slapping high fives, celebrating the win, John pulled me aside and he took me into the office. And he said, "David, I've been watching you for the last 2 years. And I've come to realize that you're a better leader than I am, and you need to lead this engagement. He saw the fear go over my face. And he said, David, this is not about you, just like it's not about me. This is about the team needs you to help deliver this. I've got your back. I'm going to be here for you. But I know that I'm a technologist, and I know that you were made to lead. And it was through that experience, through his humility of recognizing who he was in the eyes of God, what God had made him to be, and recognizing the gift that God had given me, that he called me to greater things. It was that humility that helped to bring the best out of me. And over the course of the next 2 years, we turned that together as a team into a $5 million account that totally changed the trajectory of each one of our careers in that business. Humility. If you want to be a great leader, embrace humility. Leaders prioritize team and others over themselves. They see leadership as a responsibility, not as a privilege. They recognize the contributions of others. They admit faults. They ask for forgiveness. They own who they are, and they own who others are. If you want to be a great leader, embrace humility. If you want to be a great leader, you've also got to show compassion. Compassion is all about the other person as well, but it's about seeing them in their need and not just feeling it, not just understanding it, but doing something about it. I was fortunate as a young kid. I grew up watching incredible leadership in action. At 16 years old, my father commanded the largest and most powerful nuclear missile wing in the world. He was in the United States Air Force, and he literally carried the codes around to the nukes. Only he and the President of the United States had the two codes that would come together to push the button. He had 5,000 troops that reported to him. And as he commanded this wing, we lived in a home. At that time, we didn't have cell phones, so we had two phones on the wall. One of them was the phone that my sister talked to her friends on all the time. The other one was a black phone. It was a secure phone. It was scrambled, and it was a direct line to the Pentagon and other places. And we knew when that phone rang that something serious was going on. And I'll never forget the dinner. At 16 years old, as a family are sitting around, we're eating, and that phone rang like it did once or twice every month. But this time was different. From the other room, we could hear my dad get more stern, get more direct, raise his voice. My dad wasn't a yeller, but he could take charge and take command when it needed to be taken. He got back to the dinner table, and like she always did, my mom, what was that all about? And he began to tell the story of one of his junior-most enlisted soldiers under his command. She was one of the wing's best soldiers, but she was naturally big-boned, had a big frame. And because of that, the policy in the Air Force was all about weight. And if at a certain height your weight was something, you were discharged because you didn't meet the stereotype. You didn't meet the process, the policy. That phone call was from the Pentagon. It was a commanding general talking to my father about discharging this human being from the military. Not because she was overweight, because somebody wasn't looking at her as a human being, wasn't understanding the context. Somebody was just looking at a number and saying, she must be out of shape. She must be overweight. My dad did what many leaders would not do. He paused, he considered the person, and he began to explain and then began to get adamant that this young lady was one of his best soldiers, that it wasn't about her weight, that she was in shape, and that he was going to stand there for her regardless of what it meant for his career. Now, if you think that's powerful, let me tell you the most powerful part of it. 2 weeks later, we're going into the base exchange. I don't remember what we wanted to buy, but the family gets out of the car, and I'm not kidding you. A young soldier, a female, dressed in full fatigues, comes running up to her commanding general with tears in her eyes and gives him a hug. Why? Because he treated her like a human being. Because he showed compassion. He just didn't understand that the system was unfair. He did something about it because it was the right thing to do. If you want to be a great leader, if you want people to follow you, you've got to have their best interest in mind. You've got to be willing to stand up for what is right. Leaders show concern for others. They seek to understand the world through the other's lens, and they are moved to come to their aid. The compassionate leader assumes good intent, provides encouragement, and actively engages in ensuring others' success. The world needs more leaders who care not about themselves, but are willing to act on behalf of the other. If you want to be a great leader, you have to embrace humility, you've got to show compassion, and you need to facilitate collaboration. I'm often asked, David, what's been the secret to your success? What is that one decision you made that changed the trajectory of your business? I wish I could tell you it was deliberate. But probably the single most decision that I made that changed our trajectory was when we were a small, fledgling little business. We had less than 10 employees, under $1 million of revenue. And I decided to put together a board of directors. Now, you may not know this, but most boards are put together when somebody has outside investors or has a complex situation to manage various shareholders and stakeholders. I still owned 100% of the business, but I realized I was leading a business for the very first time in my life, and I figured if I couldn't convince 4 other people that I had hand chosen that my idea was the best idea, it's probably in my own best interest to listen to these wise folks that I had brought around the table. And so I struck out to build the best board I could. And in doing so, I gave up control of the business. I said, this is not about me. It's actually about the success of the business. I say it was unconsciously competent. I say that it was an accidental success because I wasn't thinking about what that did. But what it did was it brought me to a table and taught me to ask questions, to seek others' advice. It taught me to build on other people's ideas, to challenge my own assumptions, to not assume that I was right. That bled over into a habit of always building an executive team that was better and stronger than myself. Bringing people on, hiring individuals that I could learn from, that I wanted to learn from. And building a team that allowed us to accomplish more than any one of us ever could have on our own. If you want to be a great leader, you've got to facilitate collaboration. You've got to bring people together. Leaders create an environment where the team is able to build upon each other's ideas. They solicit input. They encourage dialogue. They listen actively, reframe concepts, and simplify ideas. They are open-minded and help others embrace different perspectives. Being a leader is not about being right. It's not about having all of the answers. The leader doesn't have to be the smartest person in the room or the person at the top of the food chain. The leader facilitates collaboration. One of my favorite moments in Three Pillars history was a day that happened about 4 or 5 years ago. See, I have this team member, direct report. Her name's Jamie. She's now my chief people officer. She's responsible for our culture. She's responsible for our talent. She's responsible for leadership development, learning and development, recruiting, all of our HR. She started with the organization when she was 3 months out of school, and she's been a rocket ship. She's grown into her career. She's a fabulous executive. But my favorite story about Jamie happened one day when she pulled me aside. She said, "David, you've got a problem." Problem? Said, most days you're humble, you're compassionate, you have a very high level of EQ, emotional quotient. But every now and then you get into a debate and your brain goes crazy. Your IQ goes off the rails and you're arguing and you're passionate. And people get scared of you. Imagine. People get scared of me. That's leadership. What Jamie did in walking into my office and pulling me aside and calling out my bad behavior, that I forget people when I'm in the middle of a passionate argument and I'm having fun, and it turns into scaring them. They think I'm angry. Changed the trajectory of my life. She spoke into the truth. She acted with courage. She was willing to call me out, and because of that, she made me a better version of myself. That's what leaders do. They act courageously. Leaders act in the face of fear. They set bold targets. They take smart risks. They confront issues and challenge others to rise to the occasion. They do this both through their example and their encouragement. If you want to be a great leader, you have to act courageously. And don't fool yourself. The vast majority of courage doesn't happen in some public situation like the heroic stories we hear. Oh, there's plenty of leaders in battle or in truly heroic situations. But I have seen over and over and over again, those that other people follow are those that on a day in and day out basis overcome their fears in the little things, in the conversations that need to be had, in holding others accountable to being the best version of themselves. And finally, if you want to be a great leader, you've got to demonstrate ownership. Now, I've got a funny story for you because this just happened this past weekend. I've got a 19-year-old son. He lives in Kentucky. He started his career. And my wife, Teresa, and I went out to visit him this past weekend. And we were just hanging out, enjoying our time together. And before we went out to dinner, Teresa wanted to go back to our hotel room to change her clothes. She had worn shorts for the day. It was warm. And she wanted to make sure for the evening she had a little bit more warmth. So we're driving up to the hotel, and we look in the distance, we see the hotel, and there's smoke coming up. It's this white billow, and my son makes a joke. He looks like your hotel's on fire. We might not be changing after all. We all chuckle to ourselves, and we drive up to the front door. And I'm not kidding you, the 3 bushes in the front, right in front of the front door, are blazing on fire. I'm not a fireman. But I get out of the car and I dart inside and I go and there's nobody at the front desk and I'm knocking on the door and I'm like, you need to call the fire department and where's your fire extinguisher and what are you gonna do? And the lady's literally just sitting there and like, ho hum, ho hum. Like, no, I'm not joking. Can you smell the fire? Can you see it? And she looks at it, ho hum, ho hum. And then she starts to meander down. I'm going to go get the engineer for the hotel. And I'm like, what the heck? This is nuts. So I dart down the hall. I find the nearest fire extinguisher. I go out and I put it out. And afterwards, Teresa pulls me aside and she's like, you just can't make other people's problems not your own, can you? She's like, you just darted into a building with a fire outside and you put the fire out. What's going on? Here's the reality. Leaders make other people's problems their own. Leaders see a problem and they go to extinguish it. Leaders take full responsibility. Doesn't matter that the front desk or the engineer had the problem. Somebody had to put that fire out or the whole hotel was going to burn down. And I wasn't going to stand outside and watch as an entire building, likely with people in it, burn down. I wasn't going to wait for the fire department. After the fire was out, the fire trucks come rushing out. A couple people meander from the parking lot. Like, we saw you jump out of that car. Why'd you do it? They were watching. They thought it was fun. Leaders take ownership. Leaders take initiative and possess a strong sense of responsibility. They deliver on their commitments and hold themselves accountable when they do not. If you want to be a leader, if you want others to follow you, if you want to change the world, take ownership. It's not somebody else's problem. It's our problem. And the world needs you to step up. If you want to help us fix this void that we have in the world today, if you want to change the trajectory of our society, if you want to fill the gap, 5 values, live them. You can start practicing now. Embrace humility. Show compassion. Facilitate collaboration. act courageously, and demonstrate ownership. If you do that, you will unlock human potential. People will want to follow you. They will get behind you and accomplish more than you ever thought was possible. Brothers and sisters, at the heart of leadership is a fundamental understanding, honor, and respect for the human person. If management is all about harnessing others, leadership is about unleashing others. It's about allowing others to be the best version of themselves. It's about pulling people together and helping them to accomplish things together as teams. I don't know what each and every one of you are called to. For some of you, it'll be in business. For some of you, it'll be in politics. For some of you, it'll be at home. But whatever you're called to, lead. The world needs it. This is a model that I use with my team. When we have a leadership development day, when we invest in our next generation of leaders, we take them through a competency model. What I've shared with you today is the base of leadership. If you live those 5 values, if you act on them, if you embrace them, you will be 80% of the way there. That is the foundation, to embody the values of leadership. And once you get there, you will notice that others will begin to follow you, and you can start to refine your other skills. Leaders don't just embody values, they drive execution. They don't just drive execution, they build operations. They don't just build operations, they develop strategy. And they don't just develop strategy, they set a vision that others can get behind. If you want to know what leadership is, you've got to define it. You've got to make it clear. In my experience, this is what leadership looks like. And I want to challenge you today to put into action that first rung. Embody the values of leadership. Not for yourself, not because you want to have a successful career, not because you want some selfish gain. Because after all, leadership is not a privilege. It's a responsibility. Do it because there's a void of leadership in the world today. Do it because the world needs you too. And if you do, I think you will find what I have found throughout my life. That truly magnanimous leadership is 100 times more powerful than any management technique you will ever find. It unlocks human potential. It unlocks greatness in others. Now, I want to open it up to questions. I'm happy to chat. Any question at all. But before I do, if you have your phones out, if you're interested in the topic of leadership, there's 3 books that I highly recommend. In fact, there's 4, but one of them is on the back table there, so you get one on the way out, so you don't have to take a picture. These are 3 of my favorite leadership books. Leaders Eat Last is all about that compassion we talked about. How truly selfless leadership leads others to follow. Extreme Ownership says it all in itself. It's all about taking ownership and owning it and not blaming others, pointing the finger, or passing the buck. And finally, probably the book that has been most formative to me in learning how to build teams, how to bring other people together, and to build cohesive, healthy organizations. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, New York Times bestseller, classic written by Patrick Lencioni, an incredible man of faith himself. And on the back table, there's a book for all of you. It's his recent book that he just released a few weeks ago. It's called The 6 Working Geniuses. And my prayer is that as you read it, you will really contemplate what the Lord has called you to be in your life, and really begin to learn how different people collaborate together and how you can lead regardless of what strengths you bring to the table. A lot of fun. Thank you for having me, guys.